All right, well, I don't see the number of participants going up anymore. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm Kirby Fugglesby. I work at the University of South Dakota as their technology transfer officer. And we're really fortunate to have Sophie Alcorn here today giving us a presentation about pathways to entrepreneurship for international students as part of our NSF Corps' Great Plains Innovation Week. So Sophie Alcorn is a board certified specialist in U.S. immigration and nationality law and founder of Alcorn Immigration Law. Her mission is to transcend borders, expand opportunity, and connect the world by practicing compassionate, visionary, and expert immigration law in service of the betterment of humanity. Sophie hosts the Sophie Alcorn podcast, has written the Ask Sophie column for TechCrunch, and authored the best-selling book Ask Sophie, The Founder's Guide to Visas and Green Cards. A sought-after expert, she's been quoted in major publications and spoken at global conferences. Through her work, Sophie is dedicated to helping people live their dreams in America and empowering professionals to navigate the U.S. immigration system successfully. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to put those into the Q&A. And with that, I'll pass it over to Sophie.
Okay, thank you so much, Kirby. Thank you, Nicholas. It's so great to be here with you all today. And I'm really excited to share details on immigration pathways with all of you. And the way I like to do presentations, but I'm flexible. I can keep an eye on the Q&A panel, and I'll be happy to reserve time at the end to be able to answer as many questions as possible. But if I can, I will also try to answer them throughout if I'm talking about something and I see the question pop up. And we're scheduled to spend an hour together, and I'm really looking forward to your questions. We'll cover visas after the university and beyond, and then also green card pathways. And we can talk about anything else that's top of mind for you, how to potentially build a startup while you're still enrolled in school and leverage those legal pathways, or to do it after, and anything else you need about helping a spouse or children or anything, you can put it in the chat window. And this is being recorded. I think the university will be sharing it, but I do recommend that you list yourself as an anonymous attendee for any questions that you put into the Q&A. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm a lawyer, so here are my lawyer disclaimers. This presentation is an educational service by Alcorn Immigration Law. All information discussed should not be construed as legal advice for any specific action and is an overview only. Please be sure to consult a knowledgeable professional for assistance with your particular issue. So anything we talk about here is just of a general nature. I'm not actually telling you what to do. I can't know the full facts of your situation, especially if you're anonymous, and it's not attorney-client privileged or confidential. So you would definitely need to speak with an attorney one-on-one for any specific guidance on what you should actually do with your life. We're happy to chat with you. That's what the QR code is for, and I'll also share my contact information at the end. But there are many wonderful immigration lawyers out there who would be delighted to support you, but that when it's a one-on-one situation, then a lawyer can actually advise you. And by way of background, thank you so much, Kirby, for the nice introduction. I really appreciate it. I guess another thing about me is that I'm a mom, and my dad was an immigration lawyer, and my whole life growing up as a kid in Southern California to my dad, who was an immigration lawyer in the 80s and 90s, I just thought it was super unfair that I got the luck of the draw and got to be born in that life, in that family with those resources. And my dad would tell me stories about people born in other parts of the world who didn't have the same opportunities and who were, just trying to make a better life for themselves and their kids in the United States. And one of the reasons I love helping startup founders and entrepreneurs is because it even takes it a step further to be able to not just create a better life for yourself and your children, but also for job creation. You're going to pay taxes. You're going to invent new technologies that can potentially save lives, right? So that's a really, really cool thing to be able to be a part of and enable as well. And people come to this immigration um, system with a variety of goals. So wherever you're at, please be assured it's completely normal. Some people are motivated specifically to create new technologies, to localize their business endeavors from another country into the US and find US product market channel fit. To be able to scale here and go to market with US customer base and raise venture capital from US investors and get that unicorn or decacorn or whatever they're calling it now, gigacorn valuation in the startup world. And from a personal and professional job advancement nature, it also totally makes sense. You've invested so much time, energy, and resources to be able to go to school in the United States at a US university. You're studying hard, and you want to be able to work in a career that's fulfilling and meaningful, and you've earned the opportunity to do so. And some of our clients also want to take it a step further and be able to work in space technology or other technologies that might be subject to export controls. And so being on a path to a green card can be really liberating if you want to grow certain technologies in the United States. And then, of course, maybe some of you are undergrads, maybe some of you are postdocs, but at some point, many of us start thinking about, oh, do I want to get married? Do I want to have kids? What's my kids' future going to be like? How do we stay together as a family? Where do we buy a home? And, as your life continues to get more and more established, those are, of course, questions that you'll be facing, and immigration can be a large factor in those as well. So whatever is drawing you here today, there could be many other reasons, but these are some of the most common threads that I see in people who are entrepreneurial minded. And let's start with the immigration context, and I'll provide an overview of just how the system is designed to work and where you might find yourself in it, and then what sort of opportunities you might have from here. So, wherever you're at in your journey, whether you're a student, faculty member, researcher, alumni, a local employer, I'm happy to share more details with you today on business immigration. So we're going to be covering visas, green cards, boundary relocation, supporting your family, supporting future team members, and anything else you need help with, you can put in the Q&A panel. And a lot of people have imposter syndrome when it comes to navigating the US immigration system. So I would like you to know that a lot of the things that startups are judged by, which is a very, very high bar, because innovation is a very fiercely competitive world. It's like pure capitalism at its finest. But that is not the legal framework for how our immigration system is set up. So stuff that you might need to succeed in Silicon Valley is not required to get a visa. So for example, if you're just an undergrad, that's okay. You don't need a bachelor's degree. If you don't have a minimum viable product yet, that's okay. If you don't have funding yet, that's okay. If you don't have product market fit yet, that's okay. Certainly your valuation does not matter. It can help, but if you're in a super early stage company, you're not a unicorn or you haven't IPO'd yet, that's okay. You can still navigate immigration well before, and certainly you do not need a Nobel Prize. So some of the basics would be, we have three categories of immigration in the United States. So there are visas, and those are short-term pathways for living and working in the US on a temporary basis. And that includes things like F1, it includes things like J1, it includes things like B1, B2 visitor visa. So those are all very common visa pathways in the United States, and they don't last forever. They are limited to a particular duration and for a particular purpose. So for example, when you come here on F1, you're supposed to be studying and be a student. And the university issues your I-20, and that allows you to be enrolled in school. So that is the most frequent, status in which I meet most student entrepreneurs, although of course students could also be on DACA or on J1 researcher visas or J1 exchange university student visas, or maybe you're married to somebody with an H-1B and so you have like an H-4, for example. So there could be a lot of different immigration statuses that a student could be on, but usually that visa is designed for a specific purpose and a specific duration. And so if you want to work in or build a company in the US, you would have to get special permission to be able to do so. And it starts with navigating the existing F1 pathways and getting permission from your school and understanding how things like your major can tie into that. So I do see the question in the chat window. Are there any particular paths one should follow or majors, just like in entrepreneurship, that are highly recommended to eventually transit? So the really big thing, if you're getting an F1 student visa, would be to understand how your work permission works before and after you graduate. So before you graduate, and you would have to talk to USD about if you qualify and when you could get it. But before you graduate, there is something called curricular practical training that you might be eligible for. This is typically to have a job or do research under or an internship under the guidance of an advisor. Sometimes it can be used to work in an early stage startup company, and it's usually granted on a term by term basis. So like each semester or for the summer session. There's another thing that most people get after they graduate, but it is possible to get it before you graduate, and that is something called optional practical training. And the way it's normally set up is you can get 1 year of OPT, which is a work permit. And if you get a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, or a PhD, you will be eligible to apply for 1 year. It's called 1 year of post-completion regular OPT. And this is a work permit that allows you to be self-employed, to get a job, to be a volunteer, but you can only have so much unemployment, and whatever it is you're working on needs to be related to the major that you studied. Now, in terms of choosing a major, it really is helpful for post-graduation work authorization if you major in a STEM field. So STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And these are degrees that have been specifically designated by their CIP codes to qualify for an extra two-year or 24-month work permit extension if you're working at least 20 hours a week in a US company that's enrolled in the E-Verify system, and you have a mentor that's engaging in a training plan for you. So USD will issue your I-20 for regular OPT, and if you qualify and apply, they will issue your I-20 for your STEM OPT. So choosing a STEM major as opposed to a non-STEM major gets you 2 more years, but which majors specifically count? Sometimes it's a little confusing, like is anthropology science or not, right? So any major you're interested in, you should speak with your international student office at USD to confirm that it is STEM eligible for after you graduate. Now, you can be an entrepreneur on F1 regular post-completion OPT. If you want to work in your own company for STEM OPT, it's a little bit more complicated. We have to ensure that more requirements are met, but it can be done with the permission of your school. And there's also a little known variation called part-time pre-completion OPT. And so this will cut into your 12 months after you graduate, but it's very, very useful to know about because if for whatever reason you're not eligible for CPT, but you have been enrolled in school for at least a year, and there is a work opportunity you would like to explore part-time during the school year, pre-completion part-time OPT could be very beneficial for you, because it's basically like post-completion OPT of 1 year of being able to volunteer or work or get paid or be self-employed related to your field of study. But there is a caveat, which is it's not unlimited. So anytime you use part-time pre-completion OPT, it reduces at a 50% rate your 1 year of regular post-completion OPT. So for example, if you use 8 months of pre-completion part-time OPT, you subtract 4 months of regular OPT after you graduate. So you have 8 months of regular OPT, and then you would have to apply for the STEM extension before your 8 months of regular OPT expires. So it's great, but you definitely have to use less, I would say less than 20. I think to be safe, you would need at least 2 months of regular OPT after you graduate, so you can quickly turn around and file the STEM OPT. So I would recommend using no more than 20 months of pre-completion part-time OPT. So you kind of want to time it before your graduation so you don't have to stop working and have a gap, if you're building up momentum to be working on your own company. But happy to chat more about that in the Q&A. But definitely, to the question, pursuing a STEM field of study is critically important to unlock 2 years of work authorization for STEM OPT. So that's a lot about visas. Happy to share more there through the questions. And then we'll also be discussing green cards later. That's permanent residence, and that is how to eventually become a citizen after you've had your green card 5 years and sponsor your parents. Getting a green card is usually company sponsored, but it can also be family sponsored. There's a lottery. I'll talk a little bit about that more later. So in general, most of you are in the position where you're here in the US on a visa. And we're going to be navigating different visa pathways for you with the hopes of getting you a green card so that one day you can become a citizen. But if you're ever in a position where you need to go back home to take care of family matters for a few years and you're no longer in the US as a student or working, I would just like you to know that it still is possible for you to apply for a green card for yourself from another country, even if you're not living here and working here at the present time. So if you ever need to file for a green card from another country, that's an option as well. So let's talk about the immigration options to live and work in the US before you get a green card that are outside of F1 and J1. So one of the most popular visas right now for startup founders and entrepreneurs is an O1 visa. And we can do this in 2 different categories. There's the O1A for extraordinary ability in business or science. And there's also the O1B for people in the arts. And in the world of science and technology, the arts can often include design, technology, and product design. So for example, if you're in UX UI design, you might have a double option of pursuing an O1A for engineering or an O1B for the arts. And we kind of guide you based on where your evidence is strongest. Now, it does require a job offer to get an O1 visa or a company to work at, but it's actually very flexible when it comes to self-employment if we use an agent to sponsor you, and I can share more about that. And basically, in order to qualify, you have to meet at least 3 out of 10 criteria. And I'll talk about what those are. But the whole reason why an O1 is popular is because you have a lot of job flexibility. There's no minimum salary. It's a great stepping stone to a fast-tracked green card. There's no lottery. And you can use it for basically any field of business, science, innovation, the arts. It's very, very broadly applicable. And it's one of the more predictable visas in how the government is adjudicating the petitions right now, and it's one of the more consistent pathways to get a favorable outcome for a visa case if you're applying. So what are these types of things you have to do in order to become qualified? Well, I'm sure there are researchers and scientists and professors here. So you guys almost have it easier, because if you've been doing research in a lab and publishing papers that are peer-reviewed, and you've become a peer reviewer yourself and your work has citations, that's like a very tried and true pathway for you to become qualified for an O1 visa. So this slide focuses more on the uncommon path, which is for entrepreneurs to become qualified for an O1 visa. Now, the same categories are for everybody, whether you're in research, entrepreneurship, other types of business. And these categories are awards, memberships, what you've created, being a leader, getting publicity or media coverage about your work, being a judge, being an author, earning a high amount of money. So these categories apply whether you are a founder or a researcher or something else, but the way I've written the black text below the red text is specifically to give founders ideas, because often, early stage founders coming from academia might have to creatively, without working and earning money, because they don't have work authorization yet, they have to figure out ways to become famous enough and to make contributions that can qualify them for this. So in terms of awards, that can be things like science grants from the government, which your project could qualify for. We could definitely use that. We could use it from the US government. We could use it from foreign governments. But any type of grant funding, any competition you've won, we would definitely want to utilize that fully to help give you as many options as possible. Being a member of accelerators, incubators, founder groups, scientific committees, being an advisor or mentor to other organizations, all of these things can potentially help as well. And of course, whatever you created matters. So sometimes you're working with lawyers to get provisional patents, or you have patents pending, or maybe some of the claims have been granted. But if you're pursuing patents, that's great. That's extra evidence. But we do need to show that the technology you created is in commercial use, and or it's being developed, or it's being licensed, or it's being cited. So we want to show that what you created is having an effect on the world or in your industry. Your leadership also matters. Having a leading and critical role in a distinguished organization is very, very helpful, but of course not necessary. Publicity helps. So if people are writing about you, and this could be in scientific journals or magazines or trade publications like business newspapers, it could be in your country, it could be in South Dakota, it could be in the United States, it could be global publications. So we would collect all of those to tell a story of what you've created. Being a judge is also very helpful. So if you've been able to serve as a judge of pitch and technology competitions or hackathons, or if you get to help decide on the committee who the grants are going to go to, all of those things are very helpful. Your writing and speaking events are very important. So of course, if you're doing academic research that's peer-reviewed, that's great, but that's not the only thing we can use. We can also use, if you've given speeches or served on panels, or if you've been interviewed on a podcast, or if somebody made a YouTube video about your work, or if you speak at conferences, all of these things can be helpful as well. And then of course your pay and your salary. So for example, if you earned a lot of money in Nepal before you came to USD, we could use that. And if you're like, well, I live in South Dakota and I make a lot of money for South Dakota, but I don't make a lot of money compared to San Francisco. That's okay. We can compare you to people in South Dakota. So we get to choose how we position the arguments about you and why it makes you extraordinary. And we can mix and match these categories in very many ways. So
the types of evidence that a founder will collect are very different than a TikTok influencer, which is very different from people who are like garage inventors, tinkering, right? So wherever you are on like the introvert extrovert scale is probably going to affect the types of activities you've engaged in your life and what you might want to do in the future and how this evidence plays out. So this is just to reiterate, we only need 3 out of the 8 criteria, and they can be any of them to tell a story of why you're extraordinary. Okay, so let's see. Scanning the questions. I think I'm gonna be getting back to those in a few minutes after green cards. So for the other types of visas in the United States, if you don't qualify for an O1 yet, and if your, let's say your STEM OPT is running out, or you're not eligible and you just have a year of regular OPT, or maybe you're on a J1 and you need to switch to another type of visa. Actually, for any J1 people out there, I don't have a slide about this yet because it's too new, but we're starting to be able to transfer J1 researchers from universities when their postdoc is done to their startups. As long as you have one other person that you're collaborating with on your research, it's actually an extremely flexible category. Most people get postdocs for 1 or 2 years, and it's a maximum of 5 years. And it's like, even if you don't have a startup incorporated yet, like that, or if there's no funding, there may still be a way to get you several years of J1 as a researcher. So if you do have a J1 in research or something else, that could be something for us to talk about as well. But there are other types of visas. There are visas for trade and investment, like the E1, E2. There's a lot of countries that don't actually have treaties to the US for this. So, for example, the biggest countries that don't have treaties would be China, India, Brazil, Russia. Many Western European countries have these types of treaties with the US, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Israel. And also there's just several countries that might have a visa, like Armenia, or I think some of the stands countries do. Pakistan has one. So you kind of just have to check. But this visa is great if you are owning more than 50% of your company by citizens of your home country. And then it's really great if you need to hire other people with the same citizenship. But if you're planning on doing the Silicon Valley VC hockey stick growth blitzscaling thing, your equity will probably dilute too quickly. So it's probably not a good idea to be in this status because it can become invalid if the percentage of ownership of the company from your home country dilutes below 50%. So you kind of got to keep an eye on this one. Now, the H-1Bs are also kind of exciting these days because we're making a lot of headway in how to use them. So there's a lot of information on this slide. There's normally a lottery. The lottery happens every March, and candidates get to start every October. And this is the most used category by recent graduates in the United States. And it's also part of, there was like a corporate job track where if people went to school here, they would try to get a job at a big company, and the big company would put them into the H-1B lottery every year and then sponsor them for a green card. And that drew a lot of people into computer science and working in big tech companies. But I think the landscape for that has kind of shifted over the last 5 years, especially because there have been a lot of layoffs in that sector. And so now people are thinking of utilizing this visa in different ways. There may also be changes to the lottery next year, where the government wants to change it from a random selection process to a process based on highest wage to lowest wage for who gets visas through the lottery. So if you're planning on graduating and getting a job, then you probably ought to see if the company will sponsor you for an H-1B by March, but also keep in mind that them offering you a job isn't enough. If the law goes the way the government is wanting it to go with this administration, there's a set of wage standards called the prevailing wage and the wage level. And if the law goes through in the way that's being proposed in the future, they would give people with level 4 wages H-1Bs first. But what is a level 4 wage? Well, if you live in San Francisco versus South Dakota, the level 4 wage for South Dakota is just you basically being at the 90th percentile of wages in South Dakota. It's not being at the 90th percentile nationally, so it is geography specific. So if you're planning on staying in South Dakota, then it may be a lot easier for you to get an H-1B more quickly through the lottery with less randomness if you can try to aim for one of those higher salary brackets there. So there are other ways to use the H-1B that we can use for even very early stage companies. And we've been now successful securing H-1Bs that are not subject to the lottery. So you don't have to wait for March and then the October start date. We've also been successful getting part-time H-1Bs if you're only going to work 5 or 10 hours a week. We've been successful at getting more than one H-1B at a time for somebody so they can have multiple concurrent H-1Bs. And we've also been successful now with getting H-1Bs for people who even own 100% of their company and who are going to be the CEO. And that means that you'll initially be limited to 18 months instead of 36 months, but it's been very productive and successful to help founders. So the H-1B we've really pushed the boundaries of it in the last 5 years to find new ways to use it beyond the typical corporate setup. And there is another wonderful pathway where if you have one H-1B job that is cap exempt, whether it's for 5 hours a week, 20 hours a week, 40 hours a week, you can add on a second concurrent job to be employed in a private company. And so if somebody is a faculty member at USD who's already been sponsored for a cap exempt H-1B, they're allowed to add on a 5-hour a week or 10-hour a week job in their side project company. Or if a recent graduate is able to locate a job like that, they could potentially get a concurrent full-time job to work at their own startup. So we can be very economical about all the different opportunities that we utilize to provide somebody this benefit. So this could also be a pathway if you're not yet qualified for an O1. And then, of course, if you have had the benefit of an H-1B through the lottery before, maybe before you went to grad school, you can always reutilize this for a future company if you went through the lottery. Okay, so just a couple more notes on some visas. If you're ever in a position where you have a multinational company and you have, let's say, a wholly owned subsidiary in India with your engineering team, if somebody has worked there for a year and gotten paid normally throughout the year, they can be transferred to the US office, and that's called an L1 visa. And then also, there is this pathway called International Entrepreneur Parole Rule, but I don't think that anybody is trying it in this administration. It's very slow. There's no premium processing, and President Trump's administration previously tried to end this program. So I have not heard of any founders trying to use this program in the last year. So real briefly on green cards before we go to your wonderful questions. So how do green cards work and what is a green card? Why do you want one? Well, a green card is a lifetime status of permanent residence, and the card, some categories get you a 2-year card, but eventually you graduate and then you get 10-year cards for the rest of your life, unless and until you either A, give up your permanent residence, or B, become a citizen. And in order to get permanent residence, there's many paths up the mountain. There's the family path. You can do the 90-day fiance thing and marry an American. There's a lottery for countries with low levels of immigration that you can put yourself in. And there's the whole employment-based side of things. And on the employment-based side of things, that's why they have the labels EB, EB1, EB5 for green cards. So there's all these different EB categories of who qualifies to scale that mountain. And normally there are 3 steps for an employer to sponsor you. Step 1 is called a perm process. That's with the Department of Labor, where the government proves that there are no qualified, willing, and able US workers to replace you to do that job. If they're not able to if the company isn't able to find anybody, then you get to move on to step 2, which is where the company says, oh, hey, we couldn't find anybody in step 1, but we found a great person for step 2. Please let us hire them. And then step 3, so then there's this like long wait in between step 2 and step 3, governed by something called the visa bulletin. And then when you get to step 3, there's the adjustment of status process if you're in the United States. And that's where you, your spouse, your kids, you can all apply for green cards together. And it typically takes 2 to 5 years, depending on what country you were born on and what category you're in. But if you were born in India or China, it could take decades. So there is this incentive for people to figure out, okay, how can I self-petition and not have a company petition for me? How can I skip step 1 and make it a faster process? And so basically there are 2 types of green card pathways that don't involve step 1. And so I'm going to be talking to you about those in a minute here. But in general, the most common categories for companies to sponsor you would be the EB2 with perm or the EB3 with perm. If you've got $1 million to invest, you'd be interested in the EB5. It could be replaced by something called the gold card. There's been a lot of media attention about that, but it's not a real thing yet. And if you're working in research or as a professor, or if you have a multinational company, you could qualify for the EB1B or the EB1C, which are also fast track green card pathways. Basically, EB1 is faster than EB2, and those are faster than EB3. EB5 is kind of separate. And so we're going to be talking about EB1A for extraordinary ability and EB2 NIW, because those are the 2 that you can get by yourself. So the EB1A is the fastest and the hardest, and it is very much like the O1 visa for extraordinary ability, and it optimizes for speed. So the green card itself is the petition, the I-140 EB1A petition is adjudicated in 15 business days, which is like 3 calendar weeks. And then if you're not from India or China, you can pretty quickly file your adjustment of status application, which here would be step 3, and that is taking 12 to 36 months based on the published adjudication times from the government right now. Although weirdly and amazingly, we just had a family get their green cards in 6 weeks. So like wonderful things can happen still. So the EB1A, you basically have to show that you have 3 of those criteria that we talked about for the O1, but it's held to a higher standard. You have to show a longer sustained accomplishment of success in your industry and greater notoriety and like multiple successive achievements. But if you had an O1 first, it's often easier to prove that you're qualified for an EB1. EB1B, we mentioned if you're going to work at a private company as a researcher or as a faculty member at a university, the organization could sponsor you for an EB1B. In order to be a researcher, there have to be at least, I think, 2 other researchers working at that private company if you're going to go that route. And then the other really popular pathway, I saw somebody in the questions has started their EB2 NIW, but this is a green card pathway for people whose future work will be in the national interest. And this is probably a 3 to 4 year process right now if you were not born in India or China. And there are lots of different types of pathways that could qualify for this, but right now the ones that the government is most interested in approving are green cards for researchers and green cards for entrepreneurs. But it's not enough to intend to do this in the future and have a solid plan for it. You also have to show that you're already working in a startup, you're already working in research, you already have traction, you already have accomplishments, you already have the legal authorization to be doing this in the US, and that you're going to be continuing to do it. So this is great if you're not in a rush to get a green card, you're not from India or China, and you don't qualify for an EB-1 yet, and you are working in research or as a founder. And for some people, the trade-off might be, you know, I have to be heads down and invent. I can't go on a speaking circuit and go judging competitions and writing stuff. I just need to be doing my work, and I'm okay waiting a couple more years for my green card. So that could be a trade-off you want to make. So before we get into the questions, I'll just share a little bit more information about some of the things I've created and how they might be helpful. So I do have an online class. It's called Alcorn, it's called Alcorn Academy, and I'll also put the link in the chat window, but the QR code is there as well. So this is a 15 video online class. It used to charge for it, but I decided, I'm going to send it to Kirby and she can put it in the chat window for us. But anyway, I think like 1,000 people have taken it, and I decided to make it free as a gift last December to help as many people as possible become qualified for an O1A, EB1A, or EB2 NIW. So that's available as 15 videos. You can take it anytime. I recommend starting there. I put a lot of thought into making that, you know, comprehensive. Thanks, Kirby, for sharing that. And then the other assessment program that I offer is called Legal Launch. And this is a 4-week program where we give you our comprehensive evidence questionnaires. You upload all of your existing evidence, and we assess and conduct a gap analysis on how qualified we think you are for an O1A, an EB1A, or an EB2 NIW. And if we think you're ready and you want to get started, this is $2,500. We would credit those legal services towards your future O1 or EB1, which are about $11,000 or $12,000 in legal services. And if you're not ready yet, we do a gap analysis and we give you clear written recommendations on what else you need to do to become qualified. So that's Legal Launch. And if you're not sure if you qualify for something yet, but you've done a lot of work and you might be qualified, that is a good place to start. And then, of course, you're also welcome to reach out to me and schedule a consultation. And I have this questionnaire. I try to keep it as simple as possible, but you know, you just check whatever boxes apply to you, and that will help us assess where you're at and all of your visa options. And then I've kind of mentioned some of the prices. Most immigration lawyers charge on a flat fee basis, not hourly. There are government filing fees. There may be other things you need as well. But the government filing fees usually range from $500 to $5,000, and immigration lawyer services are usually about $5,000 to $15,000, depending on the type of thing that you're looking for. Okay, and so I'll go to the Q&A, and while we do that, I'll just leave up our contact information in case you'd like to get in touch for anything. So thank you so much for the questions, and we will get started. Okay, so the first question is, how can we get OPT before we graduate? And is it necessary we get a job before then? And then how can it be used for self-employment? Okay, so yes, you can get OPT before you graduate. You have to get USD's permission. What you would be looking for is something called part-time pre-completion OPT. You need to get an updated I-20 form from USD authorizing you to do it. Then you file an I-765 application with USCIS, and you can file for that online with premium processing to get an answer within a month. And once you have it, then you need to go into CVIS and update whatever your employment is to prove that you are on track with maintaining your status with the requirements of your I-20. And you can have, you can do volunteer work, you can be self-employed, you can get a job somewhere. You usually can't get a work permit until after you've completed 1 academic year in the school. And it's quite flexible, so that if your jobs change, you just update it as long as they're related to your major. But you do have to keep in mind that once you have it, you can't accrue too much unemployment. So you only want to get it if you're confident that you would be able to use it. And then the second question, you mentioned that OPT can be used for self-employment. Can you explain what kind of jobs that falls under self-employment? Well, most people would get a job at a company that would put them on payroll and pay them for the number of hours they work and overtime, right? That would be a typical job that you would get out of college, which you could certainly do on any type of OPT. But what a lot of my clients want to do who are interested in starting businesses is they want to launch a minimum viable software product and see who will buy it. And they just want to get money in Stripe Atlas from their website. And that could be construed as working without authorization if you don't have pre-completion part-time OPT, because you're launching a service that is generating value for you, right? And so maybe that person is not ready to incorporate a company yet, and they don't know how to raise funding, or they need time to do that, right? So that could be considered self-employment. Also, if you're a contractor, you know, and consulting for different companies, that could be considered self-employment. So there's a lot of things that could be considered self-employment. Okay, the next question is, I am currently an international student in the United States on an F1 visa. Welcome. I recently completed the NSF I-Corps training program. Okay, congratulations. That's wonderful. And you would like to open a company to commercialize your research. Okay, fabulous. The university informed you that while you may establish the company, you cannot legally work for it under your current visa status. You would need to hire employees instead. In addition, my I-140 petition under the EB2 NIW has been approved. Congratulations. But due to the backlog, you must wait before filing your I-485 adjustment of status, and you expect to graduate around the same time. Okay, well, this would be a situation where, depending on if you're an undergrad or a grad student, you know, I would be happy to help you facilitate the possibility of getting part-time pre-completion OPT, or investigating whether CPT is viable, or investigating whether you would be qualified to switch to an O1 visa and work legally at the company before you graduate and continue your studies, or potentially get an H-1B with not through the lottery. So there are a variety of ways to handle this. I think the advice you got is prudent and very safe and correct. Like right now, with only an F1, you should only hire people to work at the company. You should not work there. You don't have work authorization. But I think there are possible ways to explore legal pathways for you to be able to work at the company you created. Okay, and then how can you apply for pre-completion OPT? So this would be a question for the International Student Services Office at USD, but in most universities, they would have some sort of office hours, and you would make an appointment, and you would go talk to the counselor, and you would explain to them that there's a part-time work opportunity becoming available in a few months, and you're interested in applying for pre-completion OPT. for part-time work during the school year, and you're planning on using premium processing to get an answer in 4 weeks. And then they would issue an I-20 form to you, and then you would use that to file for your I-765 online with premium processing. And if you'd like our support with that, you're welcome to engage us, and we're happy to help you on that. Okay, more questions. How can I legally open and manage a company under my current F1 status? Well, you can open it. You could hire a managing director to run it, but then we talked about how you would need work authorization to work there. And then are there options such as CPT, OPT, STEM OPT, or another pathway that would allow you to work for your own company until you're eligible to adjust status? Absolutely. We talked about that. CPT, part-time pre-completion OPT, regular post-completion OPT, STEM OPT, potentially an O1, potentially an H1B, potentially other types of visas. And then the final question here, any compliance considerations I should keep in mind to avoid jeopardizing my immigration status? Yeah, don't work without authorization. Figure out a legal pathway for you to be able to do this. Sounds like there's a lot of great potential here, and we can figure it out. Can a religious institution sponsor you for an H-1B? It can. It would typically have to go through the lottery. And if you do want to work for a religious institution, they have their own special type of visa. It's called an R visa, for a religious worker visa. And it's a lot easier than an H-1B in a lot of ways. So the thing to explore with them is whether they would sponsor you for an R visa. Now there's a question about F1 reinstatement. Somebody put in their application in June, but it hasn't been reviewed yet. Are they working on them these days? They're very slow. It can take a very, very long time. I don't do too many of them, so I don't know the current processing times, but that would be a question to go to International Student Office Hours at USD for, or your university for, and ask if they have any insights on the latest processing times, or let's see if USCIS publishes that. It often takes more than a year. And it is typically the form I-539. And there is a egov.uscis.gov/processing-times website. And there's no specific, oh, yes, there is. Reinstatement to student status. There we go. Processing time says 80% of cases are completed within 6 months. So if you filed in June, you probably should check back in January if you haven't heard anything yet. Okay, next question would be, I had a company back in my home country which made 3D items, and we partnered with big clients. That's cool. I now major in business analytics. Can I do that on pre-completion OPT? So you have to be careful because certain types of technologies are subject to export controls. So I believe that 3D printing, manufacturing 3D printing technologies is on the export control list. So if you're doing something like sales, you might be able to do that. But if you want to actually like create the hardware that 3D printers, or any other controlled technology, we have to get involved with another lawyer that does export controls to make sure that you don't need additional licensing to do that on a visa. But you know, if you're doing like, since you're majoring in business analytics, if you want to do like a service job for sales or marketing or something in that industry, that may work. But if you're trying to start a 3D printing company, you might have to be more cautious. We should talk about that more. Okay, can I please elaborate on the visa legalities involved to initiate a startup during F1? Well, I've talked about that extensively. You need to get work authorization from your school first. If you have work authorization, then it's easier to start a company and work there. Sometimes people start a company first, but then it can be challenging because you could be accused of having worked without authorization. So you just have to be very careful, and I'm happy to talk to you more about that. Can I speak a little bit more about the difference between pre-completion OPT and post-completion OPT and its implications as regards to timing? Okay, yeah, so like when you're enrolled as a student, you can only get it part-time, and every 2 months of part-time deletes 1 month of full-time after you graduate. So if you use 10 months of part-time before you graduate, it's gonna remove 5 months of full-time after you graduate. And normally you get 12 months of full-time after you graduate. So if you use 10 months of part-time before you graduate, and you do 12 minus 5 to get 7 months of full-time after you graduate, and you just have to monitor your own end date so that you're applying for STEM OPT on time. What will be the steps for a final year graduate without work to start the EB2 visa process, since it depends on skilled workers? Well, you would be looking at the EB2 national interest waiver process, and it's really only a good idea these days if you're already an entrepreneur or a researcher. Otherwise, you'd have to get a job in a company that would sponsor you for the perm process. Are there any exceptions or special considerations that would allow me to file the I-485 before the priority date becomes current? No, unfortunately, there are not. For virtual items, that probably is not subject to export controls. Do we have any free CV evaluations for the green card process, and how much does a gap analysis consultation cost? I mean, you can just reach out to us to book a consultation, and I can let you know if you need to do legal launch or if you're already ready for an O18 EB1A or EB2 NAW. And this process is 4 weeks with several meetings, and it's $2,500, and the same QR code gets you to complete our questionnaire, and from there we'll schedule a consultation. And I see Kirby, and so you know, I don't know why companies don't want to do internships for you. You can, with caution, do CPT in your own startup if you qualify. Talk to me. Do STEM students have advantage over those with non-STEM? Yes, because you get 2 years of STEM OPT. And thank you for the additional context. Okay, Kirby, I've answered all the questions.
Good job.
Thank
Those
you.
are some great questions. To end, thank you, Sophie, for the wonderful presentation, and to everyone that joined today and asking some great questions. A recording of the webinar will be available to everyone that has attended. And that concludes our webinar. So have a great day.
Thanks so much, Kirby. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody. Keep in touch.